Welcome to the program. Julia Gillard's attempt to take back the initiative on asylum seeker policy by setting up a regional refugee clearinghouse in East Timor is at risk of being left friendless tonight, having revealed that she'd based her hopes of an East Timor solution on one hasty phone call to the East Timorese president. The Australian Prime Minister is now left to contemplate a message from her East Timorese counterpart, Prime Minister Xanana Gusmao, that there's no point in talking further until Australia has a much more detailed proposal. Prime Minister Gusmao says he has an open mind, but that it will require lengthy investigation and debate in the Republic's Parliament. The federal opposition has accused the government of policy on the run and making an embarrassing mistake. Political editor Heather Hewitt reports.
On the streets of Dili, there's confusion and some anger about why Australia would want to set up a refugee processing centre in a small, impoverished nation that's still struggling to find its way. In Australia, there's growing bewilderment too about the way Julia Gillard went about the idea in the first place and what sort of advice she received.
When I outlined that policy a few short days ago, I'd spoken to the President of East Timor, I had spoken to the Prime Minister of New Zealand, I have spoken now to the President of Indonesia, and our officials will now work in the region with our regional neighbours to get their views and to work on this proposal.
There is no doubt that the government's East Timorese asylum seeker processing centre was nothing more than a thought bubble. It was typical of a government which is adopting a tick and flick approach to difficult issues prior to the election.
I think the chances are that there will be no clear agreement to this proposal coming out of East Timor before the election, and without clear agreement from them, she doesn't have a policy.
There was certainly no agreement today after East Timor's President, Ramos Horta, and the country's Prime Minister, Xanana Gusmao, met to discuss the Australian plan for the first time. Later, East Timor's Prime Minister said he had an open mind, but needed to see the detail. Ramos Horta would lead the negotiations.
We are waiting for a concrete plan from Australian government. Talk with the President will call us.
Our final decision would have to be based on some answers to some of the questions. How many people we are talking about that each year.
Behind the scenes, the Australian government was grateful things had at least advanced this far. But the statements out of Dili were hardly a swift, ringing endorsement, and there may well never be one. Julia Gillard was fighting back criticism throughout today that she'd phoned Ramos Horta to float the idea just a few days before making her asylum seekers announcement. Opposition leader Tony Abbott was campaigning in Brisbane today.
Yes! The man comes to town. How are you, eh? I hope you kick her ass. Jesus Christ, we need you, buddy. We need you.
The uncertainty over the East Timor plan gave him a welcome chance to sink the boots in.
The East Timorese announcement is an example of a failure of judgment and a failure of process. The Prime Minister should have known that if you wanted to do a deal with East Timor, you had to do it with the government and not just with the President.
Surely it would have been smart to have a chat to the Prime Minister of the country.
Well, look, the ordering here, obviously, we had the East Timorese President in Australia very recently. I followed that up with a conversation with him. Obviously, there will be internal discussions in East Timor, and I will speak to the Prime Minister of East Timor as well.
I'd have thought that she was ill-advised to presume that having had a single communication with the East Timorese, she could go to the bank with that as a foundation for her policy.
There are question marks over exactly what advice Julia Gillard did receive. While a spokesman for the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Stephen Smith, says he was consulted, it's not clear at what stage and how much input, if any, came from his department.
So there have been suggestions in the past about a regional processing centre. What's new is my determination to achieve this. What's new is my determination to relentlessly pursue it.
East Timor is a very complicated place politically. The lines of authority are very unclear. It's very hard to get anybody to agree on anything in East Timor. But one thing they all agree on is they don't much like Australia. And so I think Julia Gillard has taken a big risk making her policy on asylum seekers hostage to whatever she can get them to agree in Dili. I don't think they're going to agree on anything.
After 2 weeks in the job, rushing to tackle the issues most troublesome for Labor before an election is called, Julia Gillard may have hit her first real stumbling block. While she's renowned as a skilled negotiator, foreign diplomacy is another world altogether to compromise deals on the mining tax.
I do think that she needs to be very aware, as a novice in the foreign policy area, of what she doesn't know, and I think she would have been well advised to be very cautious and to ask very carefully from people who do know more about it what the costs and risks of these sorts of deals are.
The government has handed the opposition some ready ammunition in an area where both sides are trying to seize the initiative. What matters for Labor now is how the issue is handled from here on in, especially in the election campaign. Next week, the Prime Minister is expected to announce climate policy, and after that, it may be time to draw breath.
Or not. Political editor Heather Hewitt.